Welcome back to Beyond Four Walls, Conversations on Affordable Housing. I'm David Dworkin, President and CEO of the National Housing Conference, the nation's oldest and broadest affordable housing coalition. We're joined today by NHC's Board Chair, S3-Solis, and Vice Chair, Ralph Perrey, to look back on the key policy priorities and developments that shaped our work in 2025 and discuss how these efforts set the stage for the housing challenges and opportunities we anticipate in 2026. S3-Solis is a veteran of housing issues in Washington, D.C., having held important leadership roles at Enterprise Community Partners, NeighborWorks America, and Make Room, Inc. In addition to serving as chair of NHC's Board of Governors, her dedication to affordable housing extends to her involvement with organizations like Eden Housing, the Urban Land Institute, and Up for Growth. She's currently a principal at S3-Solis Strategic Solutions. Ralph Perrey is the executive director of the Tennessee Housing Development Agency, appointed in November of 2012 following 9 years' service on THDA's board of directors. He's now the longest-serving executive director in the agency's history. Ralph is also the past board chair of the National Council of State Housing Agencies, or NCSHA. Welcome, Allie and Ralph. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be back with you.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Well, it's been quite a year. I think that's the understatement of the century. We sat down about a year ago to talk about what was going on and what was coming, and I don't think we saw this coming. But it's there has been plenty of drama and no shortage of change, and we're only 1 year into a 4-year administration. So why don't we just start by what do you think is the biggest takeaway from this year, and what is the biggest challenge as we move forward?
Why don't you go first, Madam Chair?
Well, thank you, Senor Vice Chair, as I like to say. Well, boy, David, you hit it right on the head. It's been quite an interesting year for sure for housing. And, you know, while we're sort of sitting at the nation's largest housing crisis across the country, you know, I'm also reflecting on the amount of opportunities that have come our way, and often that's the case, right? Never let a crisis go without creating an opportunity. And so, I would say, you know, we had massive legislation passed, a big win for the Trump administration in year one with their big beautiful bill. And while we didn't see a whole lot of wins for low and moderate working class families, there certainly were some, and some for housing. And one of those was the massive expansion of the low-income housing tax credit. Also, the permanency of the new markets tax credit. So even in its early start of the administration, we were able to see some key wins that we've been fighting for a long time. And I know we're going to get into some of the ins and outs of policies, but you know, getting major tax reform over the hill, so to speak, in the first year was a big win, as well as the expansion of the opportunity zone. So I know we're going to talk more about those things, but those are some things that strike me as year one opportunities, and then I'm happy to talk about some of the challenges as well.
Yeah, we will definitely get to that. But Ralph, how about you?
Well, you know, I think what surprised us a little bit, our agency, we run just about every program that involves housing for our state, except maybe CDBG. But the level of uncertainty, and you might even say disruption early in the year, we expected some change. We expected some things in policy. I don't think anybody expected everything stops for a few months while the administration sorts things out. Caused a lot of anxiety on the part of our partners and some of our staff. I think, you know, at all state HFAs, I think we managed that pretty well. I was encouraged that we got some additional tax credits and some flexibility on bond financing. That's going to be important going around. And I was encouraged as the year went on to see more members on both sides of the aisle starting to put housing among the top 3 or 4 things they felt like they needed to pay attention to. And I think that puts us in a pretty good spot, an opportunity to maybe get some further gains next year. But I know it's still an anxious time for many of the housing partners that we work with. There's still questions about funding and rules that still need to be worked out. And I tell our folks we're just going to try to play the hand we're dealt as skillfully as we can. But there are some questions at the federal level that have to be answered before we really know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I'm not sure if our guiding principle has been chaos theory or quantum physics. But it's because at the same time, we've been dealing with, enormous threats to the CDFI fund, efforts to shut down NeighborWorks. Both of those are still up and running and functioning well. You saw, USAID basically all but eliminated, and the U.S. Institute of Peace and other places in 10 days were taken apart. And enormous anxiety in our world. At the same time, really parallel with that, you've got massive expansion to the low-income housing tax credit that we've been fighting for years. You've got a genuine focus on housing affordability across the political spectrum, and bipartisan agreement in the Senate on the transportation HUD appropriations bill. I mean, who would have seen that coming? You got Elizabeth Warren and Chairman Scott working together, coming up with a bill that did have unanimous support across the spectrum in the Road to Housing bill, and the Home Reform Act on the House side with Chairman Flood and Congressman Cleaver working together. And all that's going on at the same time. You got this enormous drama and enormous progress, and it's kind of head spinning. But it's when you look at the balance sheet, there's a lot of different stuff on there.
Well, and I think the difference there, the things that got the axe, and the things that survived are the things that resonate more strongly with the regular working people, many of whose votes elected this president and the Republican members of Congress. The CDFI fund, NeighborWorks, these are some of our most important partners in program administration throughout the state. And the people we serve in my state, a lot of those people voted for the president. So that's a different ask, keep these live, and that succeeded. Probably fewer people going, geez, what happened to USAID? I mean, some people did, but I don't know. Nobody was talking about that much in my state.
Right. And, the other thing that's interesting about those two particular programs that you mentioned, which I think is important for those listeners that, may not follow this as closely as Ralph and I do, but programs that are surviving are in part because they are a true public-private partnership, whether it's NeighborWorks America or the CDFI fund, which are both trying to bring capital into underserved communities. It's not solely relying on the role of the federal government. There is an important role, but it is equally important that we ensure that we've got the private sector engaging in those community development activities and programs. That's certainly true at the HFAs around the country. It's certainly true with my clients, developers, and nonprofits and loan funds that are working very hard to revitalize those communities, but not in a vacuum. And so I think the other thing that the chaos has caused is disruption in the markets, right? So it's not just that this causes, concerns for those progressive advocates that are really thinking about the impact of certain populations, which are certainly being impacted, right? I think it's important to note that as well. The most vulnerable people in this country that are have the largest, housing affordability challenges are being hit. The impacts to the SNAP program and other cuts to the very kind of infrastructure or the safety net, right? We will see those impacts in communities as housing organizations. But I do think it's important that one of the things that I think programs that have survived are those that leverage federal resources with private investment dollars.
And create tangible value.
Correct.
I think tangibility is the name of the game. And if it's tangible enough that you can get Republicans to weigh in, particularly behind the scenes, where I think that's probably the most effective way to influence this administration and make that tangible case, then you can make some headway. And if it's about, this is the end of the world as we know it, and you're trying to make a case that of what could happen if this happens and that happens, it's a lot harder to turn the train around.
Everybody's going to be, especially after the recent set of elections, more tightly focused on issues related to the cost of living and affordability. The cost and availability of housing is going to be a big part of that. And all of us who do housing have a compelling story to tell. And it resonates just as well on both sides. I mean, Tennessee's a conservative state. We probably have one of the more conservative congressional delegations out there. Every single member of our House delegation was on the tax credit bill. Mm-hmm. Senator Blackburn was the Republican co-lead in the Senate. 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think anybody would have seen that coming. But, we have a good story to tell. And to the extent that the administration and the Congress want to be seen doing something to address the cost and availability of housing, we have a number of things we can suggest to them, and I think we have a more receptive audience on the Hill than we might have had 2 or 3 years ago.
And a couple of other bright spots. I think, Ralph, one of the things that I really appreciate about the housing finance agencies is the flexibility in terms of the programs that are provided, right? And so, but those are driven by the resources that are coming from the federal government, and it should very well. I think one of the positive things about this administration has been that they're looking at providing more flexibility for states and local governments to be able to do that work. But you got to provide the funding too, right?
Yeah.
So flexibility, it's like reducing barriers are certainly important. We know firsthand the challenges with regulatory barriers, but they have to come with real resources. And I think part of the reason that we've seen an increase in bipartisanship, frankly, I was thinking about this because 6 years ago I was running a national campaign to raise awareness. You remember?
Yes, I do.
When I was in Tennessee, part of the Make Room campaign, trying to make people understand that we had a national crisis, a national rental housing crisis. Now, thankfully, in some ways we don't have to do that education, but in part it's because the problem has become so terrible that it is a real kitchen table issue. And to your point, as we enter into midterm elections next year, these are the things that people are talking about, and it's no longer, those big city problems. Oh no, these are problems happening in rural communities all across the country, in suburbs, in regional places. I'm on my way to Nebraska next week with Congressman Flood to have a regional forum with, the whole region there in Nebraska and Iowa to talk about housing challenges and solutions. I think that's the other thing. There is a real excitement around identifying solutions, and most of those, frankly, are not coming from Washington. They're coming from local communities where, folks are coming together to address those issues, whether it's for home ownership, which we know has an ongoing issue as we're looking at, 40 being the new age for people to buy their first home, as well as aging seniors. My parents are in that where I'm part of that sandwich population right now. We just simply don't have enough homes to meet the massive growing need across the country at every level, at every income level, and at every stage of a person's life.
Yeah, I think as several speakers at the Solutions Conference last month, they mentioned, we have to build more, all kinds, all price points. We especially have to focus on housing, first starter home size, and rental units are going to be within reach of regular working people. And very little of that gets built without some kind of incentive, subsidy, or support. One of the things that I tell audiences in my state is, we have some resources. We can help you with that. But we can only help build what your community allows to be built. And as we get federal resources, maybe some incentives at the federal level for localities that have a more broad view of zoning and regulation and that sort of thing. More states, conservative states, that are passing legislation that kind of requires that thing. Montana, Texas, Florida, for example. All that kind of sets the conditions for it. But we've also, at the local level, got to get the talk right. Because a lot of people, when the word affordable ends up in the conversation, they think you're building the projects.
Right.
And, that's an automatic, oh no. So we got to get the talk right about what we're building, what it looks like, how it fits into the neighborhood, and importantly, who this is for. You know, your kids, when they get out of the University of Tennessee, can they afford to buy a place anywhere near the neighborhood where they grew up? You know, that kind of thing resonates with people, but it's a message we've got to stay on top of. You know, Budweiser and Coca-Cola advertise every day. We've got to be just as diligent in telling our story.
I agree with you. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've been able to do is engage new stakeholders in this discussion. So, you know, this excitement of this YIMBY movement, right, where we're getting young people and, you know, from all sectors saying, actually, we're pushing back this idea that, you know, not in my backyard, just has to be squashed. And we need to really incentivize states and localities to do exactly as you suggest, which is reduce those regulatory barriers that make it impossible to stand up housing. Thinking about new ways to build more quickly, you know, as technology is improving and, you know, the whole world of AI, you know, in a minute we're going to blink and some robot's going to be building us a new home. And so, but, you know, those are exciting opportunities, and we need to leverage those and make sure that in those discussions, houses are at the table, right? We're thinking about manufactured housing opportunities so we can build smaller, more quickly, and more affordable and attainable housing. I agree with you 100%. Ralph.
Well, but an AI-powered robot will do a much better job of explaining to you that it had promised that it would be done in 3 months, but now it's going to take 7.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They'll have all the data to support it.
That's right. We have this world now that is, it's changed in some ways. I think the biggest way it's changed is that there's a broader understanding. But, you know, 5 or 10 years ago, when people talked about Nashville as having an affordability crisis, that was new information. Today, everybody knows Nashville has an affordability crisis. What they didn't realize was that Lincoln, Nebraska has an affordability crisis. Boise, Idaho, Kansas City, Missouri, and that's I think been a game changer. The National Low Income Housing Coalition has a study they do every year on the number of places that a worker earning minimum wage cannot afford to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. And that study has become a little outdated. I don't know what they're going to do, because the answer now is nowhere.
That's right.
Nowhere in the country can you actually afford on minimum wage to rent a 2-bedroom apartment, period, end of story. And the paycheck to paycheck database that we do breaks that down into occupations. And, you know, one of the things I said recently was, you know, a dentist in Seattle making $200,000 a year cannot afford to buy a house. And if the dentist can't afford to buy a house, where are they? And it's not just about Seattle or San Francisco. You don't even need those guys on the chart anymore, because we're talking about everywhere. That does create political opportunity, but it also comes at a huge cost. And so if we're unwilling to pay the price of addressing it, well, we're going to be right in the same place year after year.
You know, there are a lot of questions, a lot of things that go into the federal budget, a lot of, you know, things happen in the world that kind of change federal priorities. We can only hope going into this year that, to the extent Congress and the administration are focused on domestic concerns, that the price and affordability of housing is one of those important things. Some additional resources are going to be helpful. Incentives for communities to really examine their land use and zoning, that's going to be essential. You know, in parts of Tennessee, folks are like, you know, we're tired of people moving in. We're just going to require 3/4 acre lots if you want to build a house. And I'm going, look, fellas, the guy coming from California just sold a ranch house for $1.3 million. This is not a problem for him.
No, it is not.
The people you're pricing out are your kids when they get out of UT and want to move back to Maryville or Greenville or Dixon and can't find a place.
The guy coming in from out of state may actually take 2 of those lots and tear down both houses and build something in the
middle. I mean, Nashville is getting to be expensive for us in Tennessee.
Exactly.
But we look like a half-price special if you're moving from the Northeast, the West Coast.
Sure.
You know, people are going to keep coming to our state. So we have to build, or the price of what we have is going to go up to the detriment of a lot of people who've lived in Tennessee all their lives or their kids.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for a congressman from Seattle back in the 80s, and people moving up from California was a big issue. There was a lot of resentment. All the things I'm sure you're hearing in Nashville, people were hearing in Seattle. And what's happened is that Seattle is the problem now for people in Nashville, and Nashville will be the problem for people somewhere else if we don't do something. The interesting thing about the zoning conversation, and this is a local issue, there are ways the federal government can have some influence there, and I think that's great and support that. We certainly don't have to exacerbate the problem, but at the end of the day, the person who has been missing in that zoning board when 10 people from the neighborhood are jumping up and down and saying, I don't want any of this housing in my neighborhood, is the employer.
Yeah.
The employer needs to be in that room, because if you're a zoning commissioner and you got 10 angry folks who are saying, don't do this, and you got 2 or 3 employers who are saying, hey, I can't recruit and I'm having a hard time helping my folks who work for me now find a place to live that they can afford, or they're commuting, an hour, and why are they doing that? That is a conversation that will move the dial on the zoning conversation. And I talked to a Chamber of Commerce group 2 years ago, and I said, you all need to be in the room, because if you're not, you're going to pay the price.
Happy people don't go to public meetings.
Yeah, there is that.
So if you're going to be persuasive, we have to find a way to engage the couple that's sitting on their couch hearing about some good housing idea and just going, yeah, that's a good idea. We need to get them engaged in some way, so it's not just the loud, angry voices at the public hearing.
I think that's right. The other thing I would say, in addition to sort of the advocacy, you mentioned employers. I was thinking about the Commerce Department has a manufacturer. If you're a state, you're looking to bring in as many big employers as you can, right? So, and that's something that's important to this administration. So how do we think about incentives for large manufacturing companies, right? You're bringing those folks in. There's no place for them to live near where they work. And we know that being able to live near your job as opposed to having to commute 2 hours also helps with productivity and those kinds of things. So, one of the things I've been thinking about is what can we be doing to talk, to engage more of those large-scale employers around potential incentives. The CHIPS program through the Department of Commerce had something similar, but it was very loosely defined. So they would get a bunch of tax benefits if they could demonstrate how they were providing childcare and housing access to their employees. But I think it's a model that we should be looking at in terms of new incentives, right? And like most things, carrots and sticks tend to work well, right? So I think that's another area that we could explore. What are some new approaches that we haven't maybe thought of for housing, but that have been utilized to bring in large manufacturing? You want to bring jobs back to the states, Mr. President? Well, let's think about some incentives that do that, so that they've got a place to house their people.
Yeah, and I think states are increasingly looking at that. I mean, my counterparts in Virginia, when Amazon brought their headquarters to Alexandria, they provided a fair amount of money to develop workforce housing for people who might otherwise be displaced. They have a program now in conjunction with Governor Youngkin that, if a county is recruiting jobs, creating jobs, that there are some incentives to make sure there is housing developed for those jobs. I think more states, Tennessee is looking at something similar. We hope to match up more with our economic development. But increasingly, that's one of the things companies, if they're thinking about relocating, are going to ask about. Where do I live? Where's my workforce? If they're all driving in from 2 hours away, maybe I should be 2 hours away.
Yeah, and many of these companies, when they move into an area, particularly like Amazon, for instance, they are building a new campus because it's unaffordable where they started. And they can bring that problem with them because the law of supply and demand is never repealed. So you're going to bring in a lot of new jobs and you're not going to build housing. Guess what's going to happen? It's not rocket science. It's, basically 6th grade math. And so there's an imperative for them to be a part of that solution. I do think Amazon gets it because they've learned the lesson. Other companies need to think about that as well. You don't want to just build jobs and create opportunity, you want to maintain those jobs, retain those workers, because you don't want to have to constantly pay to recruit and retrain every time you turn around.
Yeah.
That's part of why I think we've been so passionate about employer-assisted housing, and because it makes sense for the employer, and it's frankly much more effective and a lot cheaper than government-paid down payment assistance. We need that, but we can really leverage the concept much more effectively when we're having employers do it. There's a lot of different issues out there that we're all struggling with. One of them is, which I find fascinating, is the insurance issue. NHC has launched a residential property insurance collaborative. We want to bring everybody together, from insurance companies to advocates and everybody in between, to come up with a solution. We got to come up with a solution to this. This is a real problem. We had a panel at our solutions conference on insurance. It's now a podcast, and one of the things that I found fascinating was, I've heard people talk about the rising number of folks who are now paying more in insurance and taxes than they were on the property, right?
Yeah. That was eye-opening.
Interest. Yeah. And here we had somebody on the panel who was like, well, yeah, I'm doing that. I am one of those people. I mean, that's, talk about tangibility. There it is. And this idea of having a fixed rate mortgage is not a fixed payment mortgage. And so this presents real systemic risk moving forward, that I think there's a reason why so many banks have said, yeah, I want to be a part of this. I want to support this effort, because there are long-term issues here for Fannie and Freddie, for FHA, that we have to take real seriously. I was in Altadena, last year, and saw thousands of lots, one after the other, burned down, and no insurance company has a business model for a firestorm to wipe out a city. No insurance company has a business model to predict a hurricane in Asheville, North Carolina. And so this is real, and we got to deal with it. What are you all hearing about insurance and how people are facing and dealing with that?
We're just hearing, that it's going up now. I don't think in most of my state, taxes and insurance are a bigger part of people's payments than principal and interest. We're a low tax state, and thankfully we have not been hard hit by natural disasters. But states that have, I think, I was startled at the number of people who are going, yeah, this is a big problem in my state. But insurance rates are going up. Not an immediate big problem for THDA borrowers. More of our multifamily owners are noticing that their costs have shot up quite considerably.
Casualty insurance is a big issue for them.
And in a light-tech property, you can't pass that on easily in your rents. And so at some point, what's your operating budget look like? What's your cash flow look like?
The margins get really squeezed, and that's
because we don't have a way to cover that for you.
Right, and I think that's important. And on the other side, on the single-family side, we're trying to figure out ways for attainable housing. Well, at some point it becomes just unaffordable, no matter how small the house is, if the insurance is so high that you can't afford it. And all we're doing is pricing out people that are already struggling to find, affordable homes in this scenario. So, and frankly, our insurance problem is, or the insurance issue is mostly a state-regulated issue, right? And so I think this does require, I'm happy to see NHC really taking a leadership position on this, because I think it requires coming up with some new approaches that look at what's the role the federal government can play. How do we think about, disaster mitigation strategies, so we're not having to start fresh every time there's a disaster, hopefully. And I know we're going to talk about the road to housing. It does have some reforms for, disaster recovery. We need to fix those things so that we can at least learn from past disasters and be better positioned. But on the insurance issue more broadly, I think it's the kind of That's one of the reasons I love being a part of NHC is that we can set the table to talk about some, not just the problem, but really start to dig into some of those solutions. So I'm looking forward to seeing what recommendations come out of that group.
Yeah, because it's not anybody's just trying to get rich doing insurance. It is a risk-based enterprise.
Right. Yeah.
You know, you're buying insurance. This is not much likely to happen to me, so my cost is low. But if I'm in a place where this happens every 5 years, you know, that's going to raise prices. A colleague of mine was telling me, he grew up in Plano, Texas. And he says, I don't know about climate change. We've always had hailstorms. The difference is now in Plano, Texas, there are twice as many houses. So the same hailstorm causes twice as much damage, and that's twice as much insurance cost and all that. You know, this happens all over the country. So this is, I'm glad we're talking about it. I'm glad smart people who know insurance are talking about it. But it's not as simply as saying y'all are charging too much.
That's right. No. I think this is where it needs. This isn't a point the finger. We're always looking for a villain to blame in these scenarios, whether it's the developer of housing or in this case the insurance provider. And I think actually, we need to think about comprehensive solutions, because if the alternative is people decide they don't want to buy insurance, let's say, for example, we heard that, a lot of folks are just not doing insurance. It's a little bit like Russian roulette. Well, what happens then in a already exacerstrated
Do you feel lucky?
Crisis? Yeah, exactly. And what happens when you do get hit with one of those once in a lifetime storms?
Right.
And then it's the state, it's the HFA that's got to come up with the solutions on what you're going to do in terms of rehousing these families.
Well, in North Carolina with Helene, the vast majority of the losses were uninsured losses.
Yeah.
That's right.
And of course, if I live 3,000 feet above sea level, maybe I wouldn't be thinking about how much insurance I need to buy for flooding.
Right.
It's the same kind of thing in just over the line in Upper East Tennessee, where we had some of that. You just don't expect that kind of thing. And it also makes rebuilding questions a lot more complicated.
That's right.
So, Allie, you mentioned Road to Housing. Let's talk a little bit about that. It's a group of bills that they were able to negotiate. Everybody didn't get exactly what they wanted, but we got a highest common denominator, which I think is usually the NHC approach, and it's moving.
Yeah, first time in decades that we have seen comprehensive housing authorizing legislation that got unanimous support out of the Senate. Where has, my goodness, I remember when we were fighting to get the word housing or homes into the President's State of the Union.
Right.
Now it's been like a State of the Union, a couple of them now when we're talking about these issues. But I think you're right. This is by the time this airs, hopefully we'll have be celebrating actually the implementation of a lot of these new programs. But the importance of this, and I think that the Road to Housing package has a lot of things in there, and that's because we need a lot of solutions to address a range of issues. It really does break down some of the major barriers to housing on the regulatory side. It makes it easier for landlords to participate in the Section 8 voucher program. It provides better oversight and governance so that we're being good stewards of public resources. It provides housing in rural places. It makes it easier for those communities that may not have access to the same resources as a larger city to be able to build homes that meet their community needs. So, are there challenges with it? Of course. Does it have everything we wish it did? Absolutely not. But for the first time in a really long time, we've got very senior members of the United States Congress really digging in. I remember when Mike Flood, must have been maybe 3 weeks into his job as the chairman, went and we had a meeting with him, and he had the statute of the home program on his desk, redlined. Like literally, it was like maybe a Monday. He'd just gotten off the plane, coming in for his week of service, and he's digging into the home statute. I was so excited.
This guy's amazing.
Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was great.
Very impressive.
It's always nice to have a housing nerd involved in making legislation, but I'm also always excited to recruit to that club, 100%. And he's been a great recruit. Dove into home, asked all the right people. He got a nice collection of folks who have mud on their boots I like to say.
Right.
I mentioned that to Linda Manalini at Eden Housing once, and she said, I got mud on my boots. I can go out to the trunk of my car and show you.
Yeah.
And it's and so it was quite literal for her. And for the folks that he and Congressman Cleaver talked to, they learned a lot. They put together a really thoughtful piece of legislation. They made some changes along the way that they both agreed needed to be made, but they realized we're not going to get this over the finish line if we go there. And so they set it aside. I think that we're going to end up with, and I do think we're going to end up with a bill that becomes law. And it's going to make a difference. It's also going to make it possible to do some real regulatory changes that will leverage the work that they did in statute. And the home program it's incredibly effective, but it is not efficient.
Yeah.
And
No.
we can make that money go a lot further, and I think we will.
I mean, one of the things I was reflecting on, there's a home coalition of organizations many of us have been involved with for a number of years, and it's great to see the House leadership really digging in. And then we have longstanding members like Senator Cortez Masto in the Senate, who has been a champion for the home program, trying to get legislation moving. And, they don't agree on every detail of what's in the various, bills, which is that's how it works up here in Washington. But, there are people that have been working at this for a long time, and now we've got sort of new leadership coming in and looking at this with a fresh set of eyes, and to me that's exciting. And I wish the administration would take a little page out of this example, which is to say reform is necessary for a lot of these programs. Nobody is questioning that. I think the approach, though, is when you can take some thoughtfulness to it, right? Some real digging in, understand what's valuable. And look, politics are as they are. Administration comes in, they don't have a lot of time to do all that. But I do think this approach to taking a little bit of time to understanding what's working and what's not, as opposed to, and I know we're going to get into the budget a little later, this full kind of machete approach as opposed to a small scalpel approach, perhaps, so that we don't just decide that all programs aren't working. And
the budget is the important part.
That's right.
I mean, I'm as excited as anybody else about the road to housing, but until there is money put behind some of these things, it is an aspirational document. It sends a helpful signal that I think makes it easier to get actual appropriations for at least some of those key things. I'm very excited about reforming the home program. We often refer to it as the Swiss Army knife of housing programs, but over time that Swiss Army knife has been wrapped in so much red tape that not everyone can really use all of those tools effectively. I'm excited about what Mr. Flood and Mr. Cleaver are doing and hope that certainly gets done. But we still have a federal budget that is very much up in the air.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we need both of those things.
Yeah.
Authorizing legislation that makes it easier to work with these programs, like the inroad they have, changes in the CDBG program that would allow us to do. Right,
well, you got to authorize first.
Exactly.
Right.
But I think you're 100% right. Authorizing legislation in and of itself, when it doesn't come with actual dollars to implement, will only get us so far. And we are at a place where we need every tool in the toolbox.
And this being an election year. I mean, we have considerable debate in this month about that CR. Do we pass appropriations bills? How deep into the year do we go?
Yeah.
And then we immediately turn around because the next fiscal year starts in September.
Right.
So we're already like 6 months behind where we should be in putting a federal budget. So there are plenty of opportunities, and going back to my misspent youth in politics, in election year. People have been known to, play certain things to their advantage.
Go figure. 43-day shutdown.
Yeah.
Longest in history. Basically got nothing for it. So they kick the can down the road. Now we're going to end of January. That deadline is coming up on us pretty quickly. And, I don't want to see another 43-day shutdown. I'm not interested in that record being broken. I don't want to see a shutdown for a day or a week. Congress needs to do its job. And what are we looking at here in terms of both obviously housing-related appropriations, but just the functioning of the government.
100%. I mean, and Ralph can speak to this, but there's so many implications of these shutdowns beyond the fact that, people are out of work, which is certainly a challenge, but it slows down systems. It slows down resources coming your way. If you're in the middle of a development project that's waiting on your home dollars to come through, and all of a sudden there's nobody there to push the button at HUD to make the payment go through, those are homes that aren't being built. The dollars have already been appropriated, so we're not talking about new funding or new programs. We're talking about the money that Congress has already appropriated can't get to the places it needs to get. Disaster resources, aren't getting to the cities and the states that they need to. So there's real implications for this stalling and kind of kicking the can down the road that makes the work of practitioners on the ground that are looking to solve these problems every day, and the anxiety it causes, the loan funds, my clients that have loan funds that are trying to balance risk and want to ensure that capital continues to flow. Well, they're making those loan decisions based on a repayment, right? And an understanding that resources are going to come to help those loans get repaid.
Some of those federal agencies, they're still playing catch up from the last 43. If there's another shutdown, it starts to have more serious consequences.
That's right.
I think the last one went as long as it did because each side felt the other side would get the lion's share of the blame. I don't think either side looks good in this thing.
No.
I don't think it's in anybody's interest to have another impasse and government shutdown. That's not to say it can't happen. I mean, you've got folks who go, I got elected to reduce federal spending. And we've got other people who will go, you want to cut this in an election year?
Yeah, right.
And increasingly, folks, they get real good at reading the tea leaves of recent elections and what that means for their districts and the people they serve. And there are going to be things that, I want to reduce the deficit, but not at the expense of these three things that are important in my district. A lot of moving pieces.
Agreed. And these are, at the end of the day, they become pocketbook issues in an election year. And that's why now housing, frankly, matters because it's impacting, real people, voters, and members of Congress are hearing from folks that traditionally may not be considered themselves as housing advocates, frankly, right? But this has implications for the economy. That's another really key point I think we learned. We just released a study on the impact of some of HUD's recent regulations on small landlords, and small businesses. And so getting that data out about, what these decisions make when you make a political decision that hasn't necessarily been thought through all the way about the implications, you're impacting, small business owners, and developers and housing agencies and the ecosystem that supports the work we do.
And everything up in discussion this spring is going to be viewed in the context of the elections.
That's right.
Coming up.
It is. And we talk about tangibility. I think there's no more tangible example of the failure of housing policy than homelessness. We see it on the street. It is not just in the big coastal cities anymore. I know because I've been there. We see homeless people in Nashville to an extent that we did not in the past. We're seeing them in Boise, Idaho. We're seeing them in cities where the weather's pretty bad. People are not choosing to be homeless in a nice climate. That's not the point. It's not how it works. And we've had this raging debate over how to address homelessness, and one of the things that's kind of become the poster child for this is the concept of housing first, and it has become so polarized. And now there's new HUD regulations, the continuum of care, and I know Allie, you're involved in this. What is going on, and how do we get out of this argument and just talk about housing homeless people, not housing first, or do we do this or don't do that, but just look at somebody and say, what's the right strategy for you?
No, that's a really good question. And, we spend so much time talking about the implications in Congress and passing legislation. We need to spend equally as much time making sure that those decisions are implemented well. And in this case, HUD made a decision understandably so. To your point, there's been this polarized discussion around housing first, philosophical, really. And again, those kinds of philosophical debates in Washington happen all the time. People on the ground in communities are just figuring out how to solve the problem. We have a basic crisis of not enough homes to meet the needs, whether you're a homeless person on the street or whether you're, living sort of paycheck to paycheck and about to be homeless. The face of homelessness has really changed in this country. And I think this, we tend to try to, as I mentioned before, create these villains, these, some paint a picture of what a homeless person is, only a chronically homeless, cross-addicted person. And that's not the case. We have many families living in unstabilized, environments right now that are really literally one paycheck away or living in their cars. I mean, we're
living in their car, homeless, and going to work every single day, getting washing up in a restroom somewhere and showing up at work.
Talk to the folks at the YMCA, which is where I work out on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, right? Where this is a rural community. It is the place where a lot of folks have to go to shower every morning, right? I mean, these are real life issues. I live on the Eastern Shore. We're not talking about an hour outside of Washington, D.C.
Right.
These are real challenges that people are facing. And this recent decision to make a change to the COC NOFO, which is sort of like in the weeds. Normally people don't pay attention to it. And I think this is part of the challenge. Sometimes the complexity of HUD's programs, people don't lose sight of what that means. Well, what our recent data tells us is that this change for permanent housing renewals, reducing it to 30%, is going to have huge impacts on the very communities that this administration, really counts on and got a lot of votes from. So, and the people that it's impacting, obviously the individuals that will be finding themselves on the street if they have to shift the current funding away from permanent assistance. These funds are going to pay for people's rental subsidies. And so, for example, if you're paying a $1,500 mortgage, about $1,200 of those are paid from this COC funding to small landlords. And so, we've issued data that shows these impacts, and these aren't only in coastal markets. We're seeing major challenges in places like Missouri and in Florida, where these, small mom and pop landlords are not going to be able to get their rental payments as a result of this action. And so we're hoping that solutions can be lifted up once we're kind of dispelling the myths of all the HUD jargon and the programmatic language and talking about the 170,000 permanent homes that are going to be impacted by this change. And so that's why we have to pay attention to the regulatory implications of this. And I believe the Secretary, when he talks about wanting to end homelessness, we agree that the system is broken. There's an ecosystem challenge here that needs to be looked at. And we would encourage them to look at models that are working, places in Tennessee where you've been able to identify ways to address chronically homeless folks and move people, transition them into, and for those that need, subsidy treatment, substance abuse treatment, and other kinds of supports, well, let's make sure we have those in place as well. But that is not the full definition of everybody's homeless in this country.
Yeah, we're sort of one step removed. We fund a number of organizations that do things, that provide housing, that provide shelter. We support some supportive housing development. I think one of the more effective things we were able to do for a period of time using leftover federal money is support eviction prevention programs around the state, because sometimes all somebody needs is a quick $1,000 to pay this month's rent so they don't get bounced. And that's stabilization money.
Absolutely.
That's a good way to make sure people don't end up living in their cars.
Early intervention.
I would like to see more facilities for those fleeing abusive situations. There's a startling number of those, and we've done some of that in Tennessee. But we're like one step removed, from that. So we're really paying attention to what is the impact on the people we would fund to provide housing. We do the bricks and sticks. And to what extent is that going to be impacted by what our partners are allowed to do and how they do it? But, you mentioned the philosophical thing. I mean, that is real. And it's also reflected in the move to impose time limits on public housing. There are folks who just think this was intended to be a short-term help, not a lifestyle. And those I think this is all of a piece.
Yeah. And I think what's key, though, is having data to dispel facts from truth. So in the case of public housing, for example, that there is this belief that people are living on the system. And are there people that are, gaming the system? 100%. We've heard the stories. We've seen those examples, the exposés that come out. But the lion's share of people that are living in public housing are seniors or people that are on disability and on a fixed income. And guess what? There's no other place for them to go.
That's right.
So
That's right.
Let's talk about fixing the overall ecosystem of our housing crisis. Let's address the supply challenges. And to your point, that are based on the needs. Each community may need a different kind of, housing type.
Well, step one, if you create more housing that's priced to be within reach of regular working people, that takes a lot of pressure off of that.
That's
you have, aside from folks with some mental illness or addiction issues, which is a separate bucket, but there are a lot of folks who have just fallen into some economic misfortune, and they have other than their neighbor, their friend. I can stay with Uncle Joe for a little while, but that's a situation that more housing affordably priced can help.
100%.
It's the idea that when I go to the drugstore and I get my statin medicine for keeping my cholesterol down, the price is always the same, $0. My insurance company is perfectly happy for me not even to pay $5 copay on that medicine, because taking that statin is a lot cheaper than getting a bypass operation, and they know it. And it's the same thing with housing. We do a pretty good job of getting people out of homelessness, but the pipeline does a better job of feeding it. And if we can close down that pipeline or choke it off by having more affordable housing for people and doing those kinds of early intervention strategies, guess what? We're going to be able to focus on the toughest cases, and we might actually have a shot at ending homelessness in this country. But we're not going to do it when we're trying to bail out of a boat that has a hole bigger than our bucket.
100%. Yeah.
Well, I could do this all day. I know you guys could too. We'll do it again. We did it last year. One of our most popular podcasts, I will note. Thank you both very much.
Well, good. I was going to ask how we did on the ratings.
Absolutely. You're in the top 5, actually.
Well, Ralph always makes me look good. So
yeah, there you have it. It's yes, and I certainly have a face for radio, so there's that. Thank you both. Thank you for everything you really, not just the work you do on the ground, which is enormous, but you also make it easier for me to do my job. You guys devote an enormous amount of time and energy to the National Housing Conference. It does not go unnoticed or unappreciated. But sometimes we think these things in our mind, but we don't actually say them out loud. So thank you. I really appreciate everything that you all do.
Well, thank you and NHC for all that you do. I'm really excited about the housing supply work that we're going to be taking on this next year. And I love the fact that we've got local practitioners and national partners at the table working to solve this problem together. So it's an honor to be part of this board and working alongside my colleagues. And by the way, we've got a pretty amazing board of directors.
We certainly do.
Representing all members, all aspects of the ecosystem. So.
It's been an honor and great fun for me to be involved. I look forward to our work together, because what's true of everyone involved in NHC is what's true and what I tell my team. When we do our work right every day, literally millions of Americans are better off, better housed, and we should all feel pretty good about that.
And we still have work to do, so keeps us employed for the next round.
It does, although I'm happy for us all to retire because there's nothing left to do, but I'm not sure that's great. Coming anytime soon.
No. Thanks, David.
Thank you, David.
All right, thank you. Thank you for listening to this edition of Beyond Four Walls. You can visit the National Housing Conference at nhc.org. There you can learn more about affordable housing policies, affordability challenges throughout the nation on our Paycheck to Paycheck database, and explore membership in NHC for you or your organization. We appreciate your interest and look forward to working with you in the future. Until next time, I'm David Dworkin, NHC's President and CEO, wishing you a great day.